So welcome everyone, this is Gihan Pereira and welcome to this webcast which is all about thinking like a futurist and making better decisions with the benefit of foresight. So we've got about 45 minutes together and let me share with you some of the rules of engagement, because if you've been on webinars or webcasts before, you may have come across some that are fairly static and not very interactive. So they're just like the presenter speaking for 45 minutes or maybe allowing a couple of minutes for questions at the end. I don't want my webcast to be like that. Even though we've only got limited time, I do want to make it quite engaging and interactive. There'll be opportunities for you to ask questions, for you to take part, for me to ask you questions as well, and I'd love you to take part. So, three things I'd like you to do in the next 45 minutes. So first of all, think. So there'll be a little bit of thinking involved here. And here's a chance for you to set aside 45 minutes of your time to actually think about some new ideas and maybe some new insights that might help you in your role and in your business. The second thing is be a bit playful around this. So there'll be a couple of exercises that I'll ask you to do. And this is a chance for you to be a little bit creative. And there's no risk in this environment. So be playful. I'm not going to call on people. There's no obligation to share stuff, but you can if you want to. Then there will be occasions when I'll ask you to share, but of course, please share only what you're willing to, and you can keep confidential things confidential. And I'd like you to walk away at the end of that time with some actions that you can, some real practical things that you can take away and put into practice in your role or in your business, or maybe even in your personal life. So most of you here, in fact, all of you here know me at some level. You may have booked me to speak at your events. You may have booked me to run a masterclass around thinking sharper at your event for your organization, or you may be considering doing that. And what I'm sharing with you comes from two areas. So part of it's based on my expertise and some solid research, but also on some of the work that I've done with other clients all around Australia and the region. So one of the big advantages that I have is that I work across a number of different organizations, and as you can see, across a number of different industries as well. So I can give you some breadth that you may not always get from just being in one organization or in one role. There's also a handout here for this particular webcast, and you'll see it there on your GoToWebinar control panel in the handouts area. You'll be able to download that. It's not the slides for this presentation, so you don't feel that you have to download that now. I am recording this presentation. I'll make the recording available later, so you'll get the benefit of the slides. But also feel free to download this handout, which is all about goes into a little bit more depth around making decisions with the benefit of foresight. Okay, so let's start with the first interactive bit. Okay, I'd like to know where you think your biggest competition will come from in the next 3 years. So let me just run a quick poll here with the people here in the room, and then I will share with you the results of some research that was done recently of Australian businesses and Australian leaders and where they thought their biggest competition will come from. So let me launch this poll. So if you haven't done one of these polls before, let me just launch it now. You'll see it coming up on the screen now, and just pick one of the answers, and I've made them fairly broad. So where do you think that the competition is going to come from, inside or outside your industry, and also from or existing or startup companies? Okay, so let's see. People are voting, so great. I see some people have started voting already. Great, thank you for voting so quickly. Excellent. Okay, actually, everyone's voted, which is rare. In most polls, I stop at about 80%, but everyone has voted, so that's fantastic. Thank you for doing that. Let me share the results. Okay, so that's really interesting. So most people think that the competition is going to come from their current competitors. The biggest competition in the next 3 years is going to come from people like you who are part of the same competitive landscape at the moment. Also, interesting to see that some people also think that it's going to come from the exact opposite, which is from outside your industry and also from companies that don't even exist yet. All right, that's interesting. Let me show you the result of some research that was done by Accenture when they asked CEOs and business leaders this exact same question: where do you think your biggest threats or competition are going to come from? And what they said was that it was pretty evenly divided around the first three. So just as we saw here in this group, most people said existing companies in my industry. Not as high as this group here, but still existing companies in my industry. In other words, the people that I already know. And then the lowest group was the people who thought that it would come from outside. I think it's really interesting here in this group that more people think that the competition is going to come from outside your industry, because I think that that is going to be one of the threats that you can't see. So when you think about decision making, the people in this first group, companies within your industry, are threats that you can probably see and you can foresee and you can figure out strategies around them. The people here in this corner, the startup companies, and especially startup companies outside your industry, are the ones that are going to be the accidents that where you're going to get sideswiped because you just don't see them coming. So let's see how we can prepare for both kinds. So both kinds of competition and both kinds of threats. Okay, so how do you decide? Chip and Dan Heath wrote this book a few years ago called Decisive, and it's all about how to make better decisions now in our fast-changing world. So I'm interested in knowing, how do you decide? So what they came up with were 4 factors that will help them make better that will help people make better decisions. And I'm going to share them with you in a few minutes, but I'm interested in knowing what do you do to improve your decisions? So I'm going to ask you, please, to share this in the question box. So I'll read out the answers and I'll keep them anonymous. So the sort of things that people say when I ask this question are things like sleep on it. So when I've got an important decision to make, I sleep on it so that I can wake up fresh and make the decision fresh and alert in the morning. Another thing that people say is that they make a list of pros and cons, and then whichever one's stronger, that's how they make the decisions. By the way, those 2 are not among the 4 things that the Heath brothers identified from their research as better decision making. But I'm interested to see what you say. What do you do that improves your decision making? Okay, let's see what people say. As I said, I'm going to keep this anonymous, so I'll just read out the responses that come in. So please just type them in the question box and I'll read them out. Gather more evidence. Okay, great. Ask around. Okay, so that's involving other people in the decision. Good. What else? Discuss options with colleagues. Great. Consult with knowledgeable people. Okay, good. So there's a lot of collaboration going on here from the people here. Expand my circle. I'm interested to know from the person who said that, is that circle of information or circle of people that you ask? I won't say who asked that, but if that person could just expand on what they mean by that, I'd be interested to know. Gather data. Okay, and expand the circle of people I trust. Yeah, okay, good. Ask people who aren't like me. Yep, good. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for participating in that. As you see, like we've got already 2 ways for you to engage, and there's a 3rd one coming up soon. And I do want to make this webcast interactive so that I'll stop along the way as well. If you've got questions for me, then you can ask them as well. But for the moment, let me keep going. Okay, so here's what it means to act with foresight. So acting with foresight involves 3 things, and there's one that well, actually 2 that people don't do very well. The first one is scanning wide, so actually gathering more data and looking wider afield before you decide to act on that data. The second one is to narrow it down, and this is where the decision-making process comes in. And the third one is to go deep, which is to actually take action. So most leaders, especially experienced leaders, are pretty good at that last one because you're pretty good at execution. Now, it's still not easy, especially in a fast-changing world, but that's probably the one that most people have where they have their strengths. Where their weaknesses are decision-making now in an uncertain future, in what some people call a VUCA world, and even scanning wide so you get more options to choose from when you start. So I'm going to share with you what the Heath brothers said, but before that, let me do another interactive exercise. And this is a competition, so actually someone's going to win a prize here. So I'd like a volunteer, please, if you just type your name in the question box and say, yes, I'd like to volunteer, and I'll take the first person who says. It's very easy. You don't have to do very much except type a couple of things in the question box. Okay, so Lydia. Great. Thanks, Lydia, from the Melbourne Convention Centre. Got in before a couple of other people who did. So Lydia, I'll ask you to be the volunteer here. And your prize, your fabulous prize for this competition is that you're going to win a copy of my book, The Future of Leadership, which I think you have already, but here's a chance for you to get a copy that you can give as a gift to somebody else as well. So I'm going to go through a decision-making exercise here, Lydia. And to win the prize, I can tell you that the prize is in one of these 3 boxes, but I'm not going to tell you which box it's in. I'm going to ask you to choose one of the boxes, and just before, don't do it just yet, and I'm going to give you 2 choices. So let me start. First of all, Lydia. If in the question box, this is completely, the prize is only in one of the boxes, the other 2 are empty. So completely chance at this stage, Lydia. Which box do you think it's in? And I'll read out your answer. So just type in box 1, 2, or 3. Okay, so Lydia thinks it's, sorry, Libby. Oh, sorry, is it Libby doing it or is it Lydia? Yeah, okay, so Libby's doing it on behalf of Lydia. Oh, you're both doing it together. Okay, so there's some collaboration here. Great to have you both there. Excellent. Okay, so Libby and Lydia have chosen box 2. Okay, great. So let's do that. So that's their choice. Okay, Libby and Lydia, I can also tell you now, I'm going to ask you whether you want to change your choice, but before you do that, let me also tell you that it's not in box 1. Okay, so I'm telling you now, and you can believe that I'm truthful, that box 1 is empty. So I'm going to ask you now, do you want to change your choice? So you can stick with box 2, or you can switch to box 3. Okay, so whispering among themselves, and let's see what they say. Okay, what do you want to do, Libby and Lydia? Switch or stick to what you've got? Keep box 2. Okay, keep box 2. Okay, so let's ask the order. So Libby and Lydia have said they're going to stick with box 2. Can I ask, and we're not going to run a poll for this, but I'll ask you please to raise your hand if you were like Libby and Lydia and you would have stuck to box 2 as well, and keep your hand down if you would have switched. Okay, so I can see. Okay, so most people would have switched, I think, just looking at the numbers. Actually, it's about 50-50, but I reckon most people would have switched. Okay, Libby and Lydia, knowing that most people would have switched, I'm going to give you a second chance. We've asked the audience, do you also want to switch? It's up to you. Or do you want to still stick with box 2? Okay, no thanks. Okay, so they're going to stick with box 2. Okay, so let's see how we go. So let me now reveal where the prize is. And I can tell you, by the way, Libby and Lydia, you're going to win the prize anyway. But actually, the prize, whoops, I jumped ahead too much. The prize is in box 3. So it's a pity, but if you'd switched, you would have won the prize. Okay, so what's the point of this? So here's the thing, right? Obviously, now knowing with the benefit of hindsight that the prize in box 3, you would obviously say, yes, if I didn't get it right the first time, I would have switched. But most of us, when we have to make decisions, it's fine to say with the benefit of hindsight, I wish I'd done that differently, or I'm glad I did it that way. But most of us don't have that benefit of hindsight. So what we've got to do is use the benefit of foresight to make better decisions. So the real question is not whether in this case, Libby and Lydia lost the prize by not switching, but the real question is, what should you do in general? So should you switch? Should you stay the same? Or doesn't it make a difference as far as probability goes? So the answer is that in general, excuse me, if you had to do this over and over again, you should switch, because switching doubles your chances of winning. Now, there's a lot of controversy. There's been a lot of controversy about this, but let me try and explain it to you in the simplest way that I can. So we know that Libby and Lydia chose box 2. Okay, so let me do this for you. Let me try to draw this in the diagram. So they chose box 2. And the prize could have been in any of the 3 boxes. So let's look at the 3 scenarios. So they chose box 2. If the prize had been in box 3, which it was, then I would eliminate that and switching would move to that one. If it had been box 2, I would have eliminated, well, it wouldn't have mattered which one I'd have eliminated because both the other 2 are empty and switching would lose. If it was in box 1, then I'd be forced to eliminate that one and switching would win. So if you stick with the same choice that you made at the start, you've only got a 1 in 3 chance of winning. But if you switch, looking at these maths here, you've got a 2 in 3 chance of winning. Okay, so here's my point. Most people do exactly what when I ask audiences this and I run this in my Think Sharper master classes. Most people say whatever choice you make at the start is the one that you should stick with, even when there is some better information that comes along. And by me eliminating an empty box, I've actually improved your chances because now you've got better information. You've got better chances because you can switch to one which isn't as random as it was before. So here's a point, and in fact, this is called the Monty Hall problem. And a US game show host used to run this, and he used to give away a car. So the three doors, two of them didn't have a car behind them, and the other one did. And he did exactly this. And most people, even after this was run week after week after week, and the mathematics was explained and the probability was explained to people, most people who were playing the game still made a choice and they didn't want to switch, because a feeling of regret, like if the prize had been in number two, the feeling of regret was greater than the chance of their feeling that, oh well, if I got it wrong, it didn't matter. But if I got it wrong and then switched, and if I got it right and then lost the prize, I would regret it. So people make interesting decisions, and they make decisions not only based on logic and what they should do. So how should we make our decisions? So Libby and Lydia, I'll make sure I send you the prize. So thank you very much for taking part. Just before we continue, let me check if there are any questions about that. Does anyone want to ask any questions about the logic that I've explained there? This is the simplest way I can think of explaining the Monty Hall problem and why you should switch, and why it's twice as good to switch than to stay the same. Okay, no questions. Let me continue. Okay, so this is what the Heath brothers identified as the 4 things that you should do to make better decisions. And we've come up with some of them already. So widen your options. So gather more evidence was the one that somebody said. Test assumptions. So when you're thinking about making a decision, just test your assumptions that are going into that decision. For example, are these only options that I've got available to me? Or is this actually going to end up the way that I want? The third one is to get more distance. And that isn't to say, oh, I'll sleep on it and have a better chance, make a better decision tomorrow. Getting more distance is saying, consider the impact of your decision further into the future, because most people make decisions that will affect their well-being in the short term. So what the Heath brothers say is, think about, if I make this decision, how will I feel 10 days from now, 10 months from now, and 10 years from now? And use that as a filter for whether you're going to make the decision or not. For most people, 10 years from now, they think, actually, it's not going to make a difference either way, so it's not going to cause a problem. On the other hand, if it's a big decision, like breaking up a partnership or breaking up a joint venture or going into a joint venture, and you say 10 years from now, that's going to have a significant impact, then you might make the decision differently. And the last one is to be okay with the fact that your decision might be wrong and that you might have to change your mind. So be willing to switch your decision quickly rather than making a decision, getting evidence that says it's wrong, and being so stubborn that you're not willing to change your decision. So a lot of businesses, especially established businesses, fail with this last one. They've built products and services that used to work for their customers and clients, and now the world has moved on. Customers and clients are looking for different things, but you stubbornly stick to what you've got because that's what you've got. Like, you've got all these sunk costs in it. It takes a lot of effort to change and to switch, so you don't do it. But be okay with saying, if I was starting again from scratch, is this the decision that I would make? Okay, so let me give you, let's look at this first one, so widening your options. Let me give you a really useful exercise that you can use to help widen your options. And remember where this comes from? This comes from this idea of scanning wide first before you narrow down and go into the decision-making process and then go into execution. So we're only going to really talk about this scanning wide thing in this webcast, because I want to do it in enough depth that you'll get some value from it, rather than me giving you just an overview where it's just at a very superficial level. Okay, so the first thing that I highly, highly recommend you do is to do with your mindset. And I'd like you to be a possibility thinker. So I've been talking about self-driving cars. Some of you have heard me talking about self-driving cars for the last 5 years or so. And now there's a lot more news about them, and they're a lot more mainstream. There's a lot more discussion about them, even though they're not mainstream on our roads yet. But I remember when Google first brought out their self-driving car, it looked like this. And I was showing it to my niece, who was 10 at the time. And I said, "Oh, Abby, here's what self-driving cars might look like." And her response to that was, "Oh, that's really cool." But I remember at the time talking to conference audiences or talking to clients or talking to leaders in strategic leadership teams, and I talked to them about the impact of self-driving cars, and their response was generally, "Oh, that's a bit scary. What if it doesn't work?" So their response, rather than having a yes and response, so that's cool and here's what we can do with it, was, "Oh, what could go wrong?" So they're saying things like, "Oh, you know, people like driving, they'll never be as safe as human drivers," which is actually wrong. What if this gets its own intelligence and kidnaps my teenage daughter on the way to school? So there's always reasons why some technology or some new thing may not work. And definitely, we should always look at objections and problems as well, but there are plenty of people who do that. I'd like you to be more over this end of the spectrum, more at the possibility thinker end of the spectrum. And you don't have to be all the way there. You don't have to go fantastic, best things in sliced bread, as long as you go somewhere in the middle and you're not way over the other end and you reject it straight away. So I'm okay with you going, that's interesting. Tell me more. And that's the best thing that you can do to start off with, to be a possibility thinker. By the way, if you've never had the chance to go in a self-driving vehicle, then I think you should. If you get an opportunity. Here in Perth, we're very lucky because we do have this technology available to us. So our local automobile club, the RACWA, has this self-driving bus that you can use anywhere, so anyone can use it. So you just sign up, it's free, you go and do a 20-minute ride up and down the South Perth foreshore in this self-driving bus. And I reckon it's really worth doing something like that if you get the chance to do it. There are a couple of technologies that I think until you try them, you really don't have any idea about their potential. Self-driving cars are not always easy for you to get access to them. One that is a little bit easier is virtual reality. So virtual reality, if you've never tried a virtual reality headset, I think that you should, because it's quite amazing. This is me trying one in its reasonably still early days, like about 3 years ago at a real estate conference, where realestate.com was demonstrating the use of virtual reality for doing walkthroughs of houses that you're thinking of buying. So you could be on the other side of the world and you could walk through a house that you're thinking of buying before you travel over there to do an in-person inspection. And some people don't even bother about the in-person inspection anymore. The next version of that, so by the way, you can use Google Cardboard if you want to get a virtual reality headset free. You can just order one or download it from Google Cardboard and create your own virtual reality headset, or just go to JB Hi-Fi and spend 30 or 40 bucks and you can buy a really high quality virtual reality headset. And the next version of that, of virtual reality, is where you upload yourself into a virtual reality environment. So this is an example of a guy. I went to a futurist conference a couple of years ago as part of my own professional development. And this guy in Melbourne, he has a studio where he has his 87 cameras set up. He takes a photo of you and creates a 3D model of your whole body that you can then upload into a virtual reality environment. At the trade show, he didn't have his whole setup, but he had enough cameras to do 3D facial scans. So of course I had to do that. And so I went in there. He took the photos, took my business card, and a few days later, he emailed me a 3D version of my face. So you could imagine uploading this into a virtual reality environment, and perhaps in a year's time, when we do this webcast, instead of you sitting in your office and watching me on the screen and hearing my voice, we could all be in the same room in virtual reality. And that's not so far off. So I'm going to ask you about some of the technology that you think is going to most disrupt your industry. And I'll give you I'll give you a couple of examples to get you thinking first. So banking is one of them. So I do quite a lot of work in financial services. And I was working with a bank a couple of weeks ago, and I showed them this example, that here's some of the technology which is already happening in banking. So you can do banking from your smartphone. from your smartwatch. So you can use upload your credit cards to your smartwatch, and do PayWave and PayPass through that. You can even get your Google Home voice assistant to do banking transactions for you. So you can talk to it and ask it to do transactions for you. And this is already being used in some of the major banks. Can you imagine in the not too distant future when you will be able to upload yourself into a virtual reality world and buy and sell products and services through there, particularly buying things? So Amazon.com is just trying this. They've just created their virtual reality shopping world. And it's not that you go into a virtual reality world and you're walking around a shop. You go into a virtual reality world where you're walking around your regular world, and things that you see that you want to buy, that Amazon's, everything that you see is stuff that Amazon stocks. So you could be talking to somebody and you can see the clothes they're wearing and you want to buy that jacket. You click there and then you buy it from Amazon. So that's not that far away, and it's just gone into trial at the moment in the US. You can do payments. So merchants who previously had to jump through a lot of hoops to get a merchant account, you can now go to this little white square that you can see on top of your phone. Comes from a company called Square, and it does payments. So you go to Officeworks and you pay $20 and you buy that. You sign up online, and the next day you've got a fully Australian compliant merchant account. You stick this little device into your phone, and then you can swipe credit cards and take payments at any time without any form of merchant terminal, without going through any paperwork to set up a merchant account. If you want to really splurge, you can spend $50 and get the version that also does PayWave as well, which is what I do when I sell products at my speaking engagements or at public seminars. So yeah, it's now so much easier to do than when I first started and I had to go through this whole process of setting up a merchant account. One that's a little bit in the future is this whole idea of cryptocurrency. So I'm not really bullish on that. I think that there's a lot of hype around that at the moment, but certainly around Bitcoin, but even cryptocurrencies in general, and even blockchain in general. So there's a lot of hype around that at the moment. I'm reserving my judgment around that because I think there's more hype than reality at this stage. But something that again is possibly even more likely is the idea that DNA analysis will be done of children, babies, and even fetuses in the womb, and you can create a financial plan for them even before they're born. And of course, as they go through life, there will be artificial intelligence software that will modify their plan based on their behavior. But you can do these sort of things now, and that's not quite mainstream yet, but some of these things are. So I'm going to ask you, what sort of technology is going to disrupt your industry? And disrupt is generally used in a negative term. It doesn't have to be considered negative. It can be positive as well. Just to give you an example to show that even my business and my industry is not immune from that. Sophia the robot is a humanoid robot with some limited artificial intelligence, and Sophia is now being wheeled out to do keynote presentations at conferences. So even my job as a conference speaker is being disrupted by artificial intelligence, robotics, and machine learning. So for me, I think that's really exciting because it means that I now need to always be on my feet, be nimble, and think about what else I can do to add value. Because people say, "Oh, robots going to come and take my job." It's even jobs that require the sort of skills that you previously think that only humans can do. Okay, so I'd like to know what will most disrupt your industry, and let's do this using a different interactive tool. What I'd like you to do is go to your web browser and go to askgihan.com. And when you do that, it'll bring up a little online bulletin board. In fact, let me share that for you now. So let me switch over to my web browser. And if you just go to askgihan.com, and I've shown some results that the last time I ran this particular exercise, I did the same thing, and I've started with these same results. So what you do, click the little pink button at the bottom, or double click anywhere on the screen, and type in, not your name, but in the title. So type in what you're doing. So I did this one, I said conference speaker, and then what will disrupt it. So let's say Sophia. Okay, so we've got that one already, so I won't save that one, but let's see what else is coming up. Okay, great. So thank you for that. So as you're doing it, so type in what your role is and what you think is going to be most disruptive to that role. You can see people starting to do it now. Great. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm always just amazed at the variety of things that people will see, and it's the Institute for the Future has identified skills for the future workforce, and one of them, which I think is going to be really valuable for most people, is the skill of transdisciplinarity, which is looking at things from outside your industry or your discipline and figuring out how they can apply to you. So if you want to know the fancy word for what we're doing, this is what we're doing here, is we're using the skill of transdisciplinarity here. Wow, fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for doing that. Brilliant. Okay, so let me switch back because I want to share with you the challenge that comes when you do this whole idea of scanning wide. Okay, and one of the biggest problems is that, let me switch back to PowerPoint. So one of the biggest problems with scanning wide, so we talked about this idea of scanning wide to get more ideas, is that you get too many options. And in fact, some research by Dr. Sheena Iyengar at Columbia University has shown that when people have got more options, it should help them with their decision making, but sometimes it gets in the way. And so she did this famous experiment, which is the jam jar experiment, where in a shopping mall, she set up a little kiosk outside, say, a Coles or a Woolies, the equivalent in the US, and she had this little kiosk where she was selling jars of jam. And she did two versions of the experiment. In one of them, she was selling 6 different varieties of jam. And in the other one, she was selling 24 different varieties of jam. And what she found was when there were 24, more people stopped and had a look. But fewer people bought because there were so many options that they just thought it's too hard to decide. So I'm not going to do any of them. And this is quite often what happens. When people come to make decisions, what they would rather have is 3 options or 6 options rather than 30 or 60. The problem with that is that if you don't widen your options, if you don't start by scanning wide, then you might miss out on some of the best options. And it's a real trap for people to fall into, that people fall into in this fast changing world, is that people go, oh, just don't give me too many options, just give me 1 or 2 and I'll choose between them. But that's actually not the best thing to do. The best thing to do is to scan wide using some of the things that for example, some of the examples I've shown you earlier, and then make decisions to narrow down. So I'm going to very quickly take you through one of those decision-making processes that was made famous by Shell in the 1970s. And it's a process called scenario planning. And scenario planning says, let's scan wide and then let's prioritize depending on how likely things are to happen and what impact they're going to have on our business. It sounds like a simple process, and actually it is, but most people don't do it very well. And this is a really good thing to do at a strategic level and at a tactical level as well. So if you're a senior leader and you're not already using scenario planning, I think you'll find it really useful. And if you're a leader of a project team or a process team and you're not using scenario planning, then I think you'll find this valuable as well for your projects. So I'm going to use some examples that were identified by the Future Today Institute, where they wrote this report, which you can download if you want to. It's the 2018 Tech Trends Report, where they looked at a number of technology trends that are coming up in the future. And they've used a scenario planning process to help identify which ones are going to be the most important for us. So there's a whole bunch of them in there. I'm not going to go through them all, but let me explain how that works with how scenario planning works. And we'll pick a couple of examples and I'll ask you to share, I'll give you the chance to share your ideas around them. Okay, so here's how it works. So you look at high or low certainty. So first of all, how likely is this to happen? Is there a lot of hype around it, in which case it's low certainty, or is there actual evidence that it's actually happening or it's just around the corner, in which case it's high certainty? Then, of course, you have to look at, okay, it might be high certainty, but is it going to have an immediate impact on us, or is it something that we can put off? So it's definitely going to happen. So it gives us this 4 excuse me, these 4 options. So let's look at those 4 things. If it's pretty uncertain and the impact isn't going to be imminent, then we don't need to worry about it at the moment. It might be kind of on the back burner, but probably not something we need to think about at the moment. If it's likely but doesn't have an immediate impact, then of course it's a strategic decision. So it should affect our strategy, not necessarily short-term strategy, but it should affect medium and long-term strategy. If it's possibly going to have an impact, but it's not really certain at the moment, then of course we should be vigilant about it. So for example, I think blockchain falls into this category. There's a lot of talk about it, and if some of the talk turns into reality, then it's definitely going to affect a lot of industries. But as I said, at the moment, I think there's a lot of hype and not any real examples of it being used in practice. The ones that we really should act on are the ones that are likely and will have an immediate impact on our business. So I recommend that at the end of this webcast, you download the 2018 Tech Trends Report and have a look at it and pick the ones that you think are going to fall into that high certainty immediate impact category. I'm going to share with you 9 of them that the Future Today Institute identified. And of course, they're identifying it across all industries. So what they come up with aren't necessarily going to be the same things that you come up with, because you can choose them for your business and for your industry. But let me share 9 that they think broadly fall into that act now category. And then, I'm going to share the 9 for you quickly and then ask you to tell me whether you think they're going to have an impact on you and how they might have an impact on you. So it's going to happen very quickly because I want you to do the exercise now, but it's going to be at a fairly superficial level because I want you to really go away and do this later. So just want to give you a glimpse of how to use it. So let me show you 9 of the things that they think fall into that top category. So artificial intelligence, we hear a lot about that. Artificial intelligence is basically computers doing things that previously we thought only humans could do. Video is very big at the moment. So in terms of media literacy and new media, video is very big at the moment. So you should be doing video, and in the future, virtual reality, but that wasn't one that came up in that list. The whole idea of data, who owns data, who uses it, how do we use it for analysis? You know that's a big deal at the moment, even here in Australia with the My Health initiative at the moment. There's been a lot of controversy around that with Facebook's use of data, Google's use of data. So that whole area of data ownership and use is really important. And 3D printing, we don't always hear a lot about that, but that could be really transformative for many industries, and not just where supply chains are involved. But that's one of the things that is definitely high certainty and could have an immediate impact on your industry. The whole idea of voice, so Amazon Alexa, the Google Home, Apple Siri, and so these two seem to have leapfrog Siri, and they're now available, and they're mainstream. So people are buying these and they're using them for $50, $100, and they're using them. And you think about kids who are using them now, and they just take it for granted that they can talk to their devices and they will understand them. The whole idea of the sharing economy, the idea that if you've got some asset or some resource which is being underused, you can share it with other people, whether that's sharing the use of your car through Uber, sharing a spare bedroom through Airbnb, sharing some disk space or server space on your server, the whole bunch of things that you can share. Even sharing expertise, where you bring in freelancers and you use services like Upwork and others to make use of expertise. Wearables, of course, big at the moment. So smartwatches are big, and there'll be other wearables and even embedded. You'll have chips embedded inside you in the future, but think of wearables as one that's available right now. The idea that in personal spaces, we've now got smarter homes where we can control things in our house from an app on our phones. This is also happening with smart offices and smart buildings. So if you're in that area or if you're working in those sort of environments, you know that this is a big thing at the moment. And of course, related to that is the whole idea of sustainability and looking after our carbon footprint. So those are 9 things that the Future Today Institute has identified as potential disruptors. So they are things that we should act on now because they're high impact and possibly, so they're high impact for you, but also really certain that they're really going to happen. So they almost certainly will have an effect on the world. So my question is, will they have an effect on you? So I'm just going to ask you in the question box a couple of things. So one is, given that we're getting close to the end of today's webcast, do you have any questions for me? So please ask them in the question box if you have them. And also, which of these things do you think might have an impact on you? And for that second question, again, I won't say, I'll keep this anonymous, so I won't read out your name. If you say artificial intelligence will have an impact on you, but I'll read it out just so that everybody else can hear what other people are saying in the room. But also feel free to ask any questions around that, around anything we've covered today. Yep, so someone said data and video are two big ones, and AI. Yeah, AI, video, wearables, AI. Yep, data. Yeah, so I'm a senior talent acquisition. Yes, I know who this is. I'm a senior talent acquisition partner. The big ones for me are AI and the gig economy. Absolutely, yeah. I think for you as well, data is going to be a big one. Data, sustainability, AI, and video as well. Yeah, great. So as I said, I'm really glad that, and thank you very much for those of you who responded there. As I said, this is very broad because obviously we can't do this for every industry. And the Future Today Institute, I saw the question that said, where did you get the report from? It's the Future Today Institute. So the Future Today Institute, as they also have to make a pretty broad assessment of how this is going to affect the world and industry in general. I highly recommend that you go and get their report. Let me jump back and see if I can get that for you again. Download the report and run the scenario planning exercise yourself with your team, and particularly your leadership team, to do this exercise for yourself based on some of the things that they say. So you might have an intuitive feel for what you think is going to make a difference for you, but the biggest value you'll get from the Future Today Institute is, I think, the idea of where they think are going to be high certainty technology trends. And then you can decide whether they're going to have an immediate impact on you or not. So I think the high certainty, low certainty is where you're going to get the biggest value from that report, because that's based on their assessment, which is their expert assessment. And then you can decide, is it going to have an immediate impact on us or not so much of an impact? Just be open-minded around this. So you may think things like 3D printing aren't going to make a difference for you, say if you're working in the events industry. But 3D printing is being used to print things in the events industry as well. So they're being used by sponsors, they're being used in trade booths, they're being used to construct things. So you might think they don't really apply to us because they only apply to us if they're the products that we sell, but just be a bit open-minded about that and don't discard them just because you can't see an obvious use for them. Okay, so in summary, so we talked about two of the three things, and we didn't really go through either of them in a lot of detail, but I hope you've got enough of a glimpse there of how you can scan a bit wider, so look a little bit wider for some things that will affect you, and also that scenario planning process that will help you narrow down to help you with the decision making. It's one of the many processes that futurists use to help people make better decisions when they're with the skill of foresight. And as I said, this whole thing is not about bright, shiny objects and finding and seeing what's the latest tools out there, the latest technology, the coolest stuff. It's all about how you can use that to make better decisions. Don't wait to make decisions with hindsight, make them with foresight. So here's one of the one last story that I want to end with is this idea of it's called the Sorites paradox. And if I ask you the question, if you look at that picture there, and I say, is that a heap of sand? And assuming that's sand, most people will say, yes, it is. And I say, if I take away a grain of sand, is it still a heap of sand? And you say, yes. What if I took another one, and another one, another one? I could take away thousands of grains of sand, and you'd still say, yes, that's a heap of sand. But eventually, we'd just get down to a few scattered grains of sand on the ground. And then, if I said, is that a heap of sand? You say, no, it's not. So my question is, when does it stop becoming a heap of sand? And there's no real answer. There's no right answer for that. And this is what happens for disruption for a number of businesses and sometimes even industries, that you may lose a grain of sand because you lose a customer or client to somebody else. Some other grain of sand goes when somebody starts using an app. Some other grain of sand comes because a competitor comes up with a slightly better product. And you think that that's not making much of a difference. We've still got a heap of sand here. We've still got a competitive advantage. We've still got a really profitable and effective organization. But one day you might wake up and find that you no longer have that heap of sand. So don't wait. So use the benefit of foresight to make better decisions so that you ensure that your advantage isn't getting eroded away little by little by little. So thank you everyone for coming along. My last message is start before you're ready. Don't wait until all your ducks are lined up in a row. That will never happen. So whatever action you want to take, please take it now. Start before you're ready. I'd love you to come and have a chat with me. If you've already booked me to speak at your conference in the past, come and talk to me about my Think Sharper Masterclass, because this is where we go into this in a lot more detail, and we work through with your team, with your leadership team or with your project teams, how to implement some of these ideas. So scenario planning is one of them. We talk about a number of other tools like that as well that'll help you become more fit for the future. Thanks, everyone. I will send the recording of this around. So thank you, everyone, for being part of the webcast. I will also send you, I'd love to do this more frequently and share some other ideas as well. So I'll also send you emails about the future webcast and the program as well. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. Bye for now.